Singapore, midnight in London and 1 a.m. in the Polish city of Katowice, where just a few hours ago the United Nations gave a stark warning about climate change. Patricia Espinosa opened the latest gathering, a call to try to find a solution to the problem by telling delegates that the threat posed to humanity by rising temperatures has never been worse. Have a listen.
The effects that are happening are affecting communities around the world, casualties, destruction in so many places, suffering, a lot of suffering derived from the consequences of climate change. Just make it really make our work more urgent.
A tough message from the United Nations there, but it seems it isn't necessarily getting through. Cutting back on the use of fossil fuels like oil and coal is seen as vital if we want to reduce emissions which contribute to climate change. But in Poland, the host for this summit, that's just not happening. Our environment correspondent David Shukman reports.
A mountain of coal lies freshly dug at a mine, one of many here in southern Poland, at the centre of arguments over what to do about global warming. Okay, so we're on our way down. Oh, I'm starting to feel the air pressure on my ears now. Our first sight of the mining process. This coal is used to make steel, but most is burned to generate electricity. We reach a tangle of cables and pipes, and the rock above us keeps shifting. This is literally the coal face, and despite that spray of water, it's amazingly dusty around here, very noisy, a really hostile place to work. And because coal can be so polluting, many countries, including Britain, have moved away from it. But here in Poland, thousands of people work in the coal mines. Coal is a mainstay of the Polish economy. So while climate scientists say the world should move away from coal, here it looks set to last for decades.
Stanowiska pracy by zostały pozamykane nie tylko w kopalniach, ale w dużych przedsiębiorstwach, które operują z kopalniami. Bardzo dużo stanowisk zostało zamkniętych.
But back at the surface, one green campaigner offers a different vision of clean solar power. He knows he's outnumbered here.
Burning coal, burning fossil fuels, using fossil fuels in the energy sector, it is a source of huge CO2 emissions, and it hurts our climate, it hurts our planet.
This region has some of the dirtiest air in Europe, something that'll focus minds as the climate talks get underway. David Shukman, BBC News in Poland.
Let's take a moment to have a look at some of the day's other news stories. China's President Xi Jinping is making the most of his trip to Argentina for the G20 summit by extending his visit to sign some trade deals. The Argentine President Mauricio Macri was once again his host. The two leaders shook hands again just 2 days after they exchanged similar formalities. Now, that meeting failed to reach agreement on key issues, but Mr. Xi and his host seem to be happy with their own arrangements.
I would say that we had an excellent meeting, during which we revisited all of the projects we have in common. Unfortunately, it is a long agenda, and we always have to benefit Argentines as much as the Chinese.
Although China and Argentina are far apart, the two countries have always adhered to the spirit of mutual respect, trust and win-win cooperation, so we become strategic partners and good friends.
Also making news today, President Trump's unique approach to diplomacy is in the spotlight once again after the South Korean President Moon Jae-in revealed details of a conversation with the US leader about North Korea. Mr. Moon told reporters that Mr. Trump had asked him to pass on a message to Kim Jong-un, and that message was that the American president had very favorable views towards the North Korean leader and that he likes him. A senior member of Theresa May's cabinet has warned that if the British Parliament fails to support her Brexit deal, the UK could either leave with no agreement or even not leave at all. The Environment Secretary, Michael Gove, who campaigned for Britain to leave the EU, said that while the deal on offer wasn't ideal, there was no better alternative.
This deal, of course, is not perfect, but it does provide those of us who campaigned to leave with an opportunity to take back control of our borders and have control of our immigration policy. It means that we end the huge automatic sums that go to the EU every week, and it gives us the capacity in huge sectors of our economy to diverge if we think that's right.
The number of people still missing following last month's wildfires in California has fallen to 25. The death toll is unchanged at 88. It now seems that many of those who fled their homes have finally reported their whereabouts to authorities. Now, how is this for a story of lost and found? This couple just there, this is John and Daniela. They're a couple from the UK, and this is shortly after John actually proposed to Daniela in Manhattan. But disastrously, this engagement ring fell down a grate. The couple then had to return to the UK, thinking that it was lost, never to be returned. But the New York Police Department saw that particular video, then recovered the ring before issuing an appeal on social media and hoping to reunite it with its owners. John and Daniela have now come forward. They will be getting that ring back, and I'm pleased to say in plenty of time for their wedding.
Now, the US and China have been exchanging ever-increasing tariffs on their trade war as that gathers pace, but the dispute has now been put on hold after a meeting between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the G20 summit. The two leaders agreed to postpone the imposition of the latest round of US import taxes for 90 days to allow the wide-ranging talks. The White House said it was a highly successful meeting, and Xi Jinping said cooperation was the best choice for both countries. Well, earlier I spoke to Amy Zhuang. She's the chief analyst for Asia at the financial services group Nordea, and I asked her whether it was a win-win agreement for both countries.
Well, clearly, I mean, this is a win-win situation, at least in the next 3 months, while they're working out a deal. And I'm also sure that both leaders will go home and declare a win from this truce. And from the China side, Xi Jinping could say that we got the U.S. to postpone further tariffs, and that will give a relief to our economy through the export sector and the manufacturing sector, because the trade war has already bites into the economy and the manufacturing sector. But the U.S., Trump will also go home and basically say, well, China has agreed to buy more products from us, especially agriculture products. So the farmers, his core supporters, will really be happy about this. And then he says that we still have some leverage on China and pressure them. So both sides will declare this a win.
Right, but it's a temporary truce, isn't it? I mean, 90 days doesn't seem like much time to work through a lot of the structural changes that the US is demanding of China, particularly things like intellectual property and, you know, the transfer of technology. So what will they come away with in terms of going forward?
Yeah, that's the interesting part, because this declaration hasn't really come up with any details. What are the terms that the U.S. are expecting to come up, the specific ones, in terms of, how much needs China has to do and the timeline, and will China be living up to that? And I guess those details will be probably announced gradually over the next 3 months. But I don't think any agreement as such, and especially not that China will see any meaningful reform progress, and 3 months are just too short. But if they both do try to meet each other in the middle within the next 3 months, they could easily postpone further escalations even further into the future. So this is a positive first step, of course.
All right, we know there are already some tariffs in place at the moment, and there's been some impact on both economies. We saw growth in China's manufacturing sector stalling for the first time in November. The US comes out with trade data this week as well. So how has all of this trade war, impacted the world's two largest economies?
Clearly, China has definitely intensified the slowdown that the Chinese economy already seen before the trade war started. But on the U.S., the pressure on inflation, especially on consumer inflation, because they import so many consumer goods from China, I mean, that pressure is also relieving, and that's important just ahead of Christmas time. So I guess both countries can sigh of relief now, but that relief is temporary, and uncertainty remains very high.
Amy Yuan Zhuang there speaking to Sharonjeet a little bit earlier. Now let's turn to Europe. A huge clear-up operation has been taking place in Paris after the worst civil unrest in France for several decades. More than 400 arrests were made as protesters, calling themselves the Yellow Jackets, clashed with police around some of the city's most famous landmarks. They want President Macron to scrap his increased taxes on fuel, something that he's adamant he will not do. Lucy Williamson reports.
France's scars are visible today, burnt into its most exclusive. The cost of economic conflict, long felt outside the city centres, now being scrubbed inch by inch from the capital's face. Among the targets last night was Yasmin's car. She's not a government representative, but a single parent with 5 children.
I understand the protesters, but the way they are acting right now, no. We are not dying from hunger. We have social care. It's not perfect, but I also work and raise my kids. I suffer from the tax rises too.
Last night's violence was unusual for France. Those now flocking to this movement include anarchists and political agitators. President Macron has said that rioters will not be tolerated, but it's not always easy to tell who's who. Even among the many peaceful protesters are those who say France's institutions aren't working and rebellion is overdue. The most popular demand at protest sites around the country: Macron resign. They're cleaning off the graffiti now, but the discontent that sparked this movement is harder to wipe away. President Macron has cast himself as an economic reformer who stands firm against protesters. But when do protesters become simply the French people? Jean will be 70 this month, but he was at the protest here last night too.
If the protest had gone very calmly, Macron would have come back from Argentina and said it's all fine, it'll die down, I'll stick to my position and I won't change anything. It's sad to say, but it's the reality.
President Macron met his government for an urgent meeting today. A spokesman said a state of emergency could be imposed. He was booed even as he came to thank the firemen on duty for the protests. Fresh from the battles of the G20 summit in Argentina, the French president even tougher diplomacy at home. Lucy Williamson, BBC News, Paris.
Well, you're watching Newsday on the BBC. Still to come on the programme. Less cheers for beers. Are Australians falling out of love with alcohol?
Also coming up on the programme, creating real opportunities for disabled people across the world. The World Health Organization pushes to raise awareness of the 1 billion people living with a disability.
It's quite clear that the worst victims of this disaster are the poor people living in the slums which have sprung up around the factory.
That the children are dying in front of me and I can't do anything.
Charles Manson is the mystical leader of the hippie cult suspected of killing Sharon Tate and at least 6 other people in Los Angeles.
At 11 o'clock this morning, just half a metre separated Britain from continental Europe. It took the drills just a few moments to cut through the final obstacle. Then Philippe Cosette, a miner from Calais, was shaking hands and exchanging flags with Robert Fagg, his opposite number from Dover.
Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us here on Newsday. I'm Sharonjeet Lail in Singapore.
And I'm Kasia Madeira in London. Our top stories this hour. The UN warns the threat posed to all of us by climate change has never been this serious as a global climate summit opens with a push to cut emissions.
And there's been a ceasefire in the trade war between the US and China as Donald Trump and Xi Jinping put punishing tariffs on hold. And this video from the G20 summit illustrates just how frustrating it can be when you're the host. Argentina's President Macri was greeting Donald Trump when the US leader decided he wasn't going to wait around for any more photographs. Mr. Macri looked a little bit disappointed at his departure, and he took a moment to recompose himself before getting ready to greet his next guest. Let's take a look now at some of the front pages from around the world. We start with the South China Morning Post, which is also leading with that story that we've been covering, and that's the meeting between China and the US at the G20 summit. They report on President Xi and President Trump agreeing a 90-day truce to their trade war. Well, no surprise, the Straits Times also features the meeting, describing a global sigh of relief at the outcome, but it's also touching on Saturday's violent protests in Paris, which it says were the worst France has experienced in decades. And the Japan Times has also got the Xi-Trump meeting on its cover, and this time warning that Japan is now in President Trump's crosshairs, and that's after he agreed to that trade war ceasefire with China. It also looks at the G20 meeting between France's President Macron and Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, and looks at how the arrest of Renault and Nissan car executive Carlos Ghosn in Japan could potentially put a strain on relations between the two countries. Well, that brings you up to date with some of the papers. Kasia, what are the stories sparking discussions online?
Oh, Sharanjit, for boxing fans, there was one story, the one must-see fight this weekend in Los Angeles. Have a look at this.
All together now. So bye, bye, Miss American Pie. Drove my Chevy to the levee, but the levee was dry.
Well, that is just after the fight. That is, of course, the British heavyweight boxer Tyson Fury, and he is singing, if somewhat out of tune, I hope he doesn't mind my saying that, after his title fight with America's Deontay Wilder. This is proving really popular on BBC.com, and as you can see, he seemed happy enough despite being knocked down twice.
Now, Australians have a reputation for being rather alcoholic drinks, but it seems that claim might not be rooted in reality, at least not if you look at the official figures, which suggest consumption has fallen to their lowest levels in decades. According to the research, the average Australian will each year knock back about 224 cans of beer and 38 bottles of wine. They'll also get through about 17 bottles of cider and polish off 4 bottles of spirits. But the same statistics also suggest that 1/5 of the Australian population are teetotal, meaning they never drink any alcohol at all. Phil Mercer has the story.
Believe it or not, alcohol consumption in fun-loving Australia is at its lowest since the early 1960s. Beer, wine and spirits are still a big part of life here. But in a land with a boozy reputation, it's young people who are drinking less.
I think it's really interesting. I think we have turned a significant corner. Over the last decade, we've progressively seen an improvement in those issues. Less binge drinking, less actually persistent alcohol-related risk amongst younger people. I think we are seeing issues related to lifestyle and living healthier come into play.
Australia's tastes are changing. Small craft brewers say that beer made with native ingredients is becoming more popular as drinkers choose quality over quantity.
People drinking less, but drinking better. So instead of taking their $30 into a pub and saying, I want to get as many beers as I can out of this, they're actually saying, I want to have the best experience that I can. So I'm going to go in and I might only get 2 beers out of this, but I'm going to have an experience. I'm going to taste something, I'm going to hear a story, I'm going to be transported by this beer.
Australians do love to party. For many, drinking is a national pastime, especially on days when there are major sporting events. Alcohol here is widely available and it's relatively cheap. For most, it's just a bit of fun, a social lubricant that helps them to relax. But for others, alcohol has a far darker side.
A march in Sydney has celebrated those trying to conquer their addictions. Alcohol is Australia's most lethal drug. It kills more people each year than all illicit substances put together. For some, it's a demon that's hard to overcome.
I just knew that I just needed alcohol to make me feel good,
give me that confidence, allow me to get out of bed or whatever, just not wanting to live anymore. So recovery's really given me a new gift of life and just the opportunity to be that mum and that person I'm meant to be.
The Australian government recommends no more than 2 standard drinks each day. That plea for moderation appears to be working. Although Australia's love affair with booze might be fading, it's still a place that loves to party. Phil Mercer, BBC News, Sydney.
1 billion people live with a disability. That is according to the World Health Organization. This is a huge figure, roughly 15% of the global population. And it's having a profound effect on how society responds. Well, Monday, the 3rd of December, is designated by the United Nations as the International Day of Disabled Persons. So earlier I spoke to Dr. Alarcos Cieza from the World Health Organization to find out more about this day.
I would say that society do not really have an understanding of all the hurdles that people with disability face in everyday life. So I think that that we need to consider that people with disabilities have or experience barriers when accessing education, when accessing employment, in social and political life, in community participation, but also even accessing health services. And this is probably an understanding that not everyone has.
So how do you then influence governments? How do you influence policy? How do you influence people every day to get a better understanding of this? How important is days like the 3rd of December? Actually,
December 3rd is a very important day. And I would like to mention that, for example, the UN agencies here in Geneva come together, or the United Nations agencies here in Geneva come together to celebrate December 3rd with the slogan, "A Day for All." The message also behind this slogan is that disability is a universal experience, in the sense that every one of us has experiences or will experience disability in our lifetime. So it is also important, we need to stop talking about them when we talk about people with disability and about us. Disability is about all of us. And I think this recognition in society is also extremely important. And it is reflective also in the number that you mentioned at the beginning. We are talking of 15% of the world population experiencing significant or having significant disability.
Okay, so if so many of us are touched by this, will experience this, why is there still such a problem with inclusion? Why is there still a need for days like the 3rd of December, for example?
Yeah, I think one of the main barriers, and probably one of the most important barriers, is really political will. Political will to make sure that persons with disabilities participate in society on an equal basis with others. Let me, for example, let me take the example of the access to assistive products such as glasses, hearing aids, or wheelchairs. Imagine that only 1 in 10 people who need these devices have access to them.
Dr. Cieza there from the WHO. And Sharonjit, just let's remind everybody that the 3rd of December is the International Day of Disabled Persons. Really important to gain awareness for that. You've been watching Newsday. I am Kasia Madeira in London.
And I'm Sharonjit Lail in Singapore. You can stay with us because we'll be taking a look at the market reaction in the aftermath of what we've been telling you all about that G20 summit over the weekend.
We look forward to that, Sharonjit. We'll join you shortly. But before we finish with this edition of Newsday, Sharonjit, is it too early to mention Christmas yet? We are in December, so why not end the show with this invasion of skiing and snowboarding Santas? They took to the slopes of Newry in the US state of Maine. The event is staged every year to raise money for local charities. From Sharonjit, from me and the Santas, bye-bye.
Hello, more rain for parts of England and Wales in the day ahead. Tuesday quieter for all, but then the weather gets pretty busy again from Wednesday, as we will see. A chilly start the further north you are as Monday begins, and in Scotland a risk of ice on untreated surfaces because we had some wet weather overnight. It's cleared away, allowing temperatures to dip away. As we go on through the day, this is the area of clouds, some showers or outbreaks of rain moving through parts of England and Wales. It could produce some heavier bursts, squally winds, South Wales and southwest England to northernmost counties of northern England, Northern Ireland and much of Scotland will stay dry and sunny, though on the northerly breeze it's quite chilly here and there are further showers running into northern Scotland. Wintry in nature to relatively low ground as we go into the late afternoon evening, but a big range of temperatures, very mild again across South Wales and southern England, with temperatures approaching the mid-teens. But on the northerly flow here, that colder air filters southwards across all parts through Monday night and into Tuesday morning. You'll notice still a few showers around in Scotland, wintry in nature, so dusting of snow possible here and there, and icy patches again as Tuesday begins. But it does look like a widespread frost is going to be the most noticeable part of Tuesday morning, and there could be a few fog patches around as well. So we know it's going to be cold as Tuesday begins, but there will be plenty of sunshine around. Now, temperatures will be held down into single figures despite the sunshine after that cold, frosty start, and this looks to be the coldest day of the week, more widely speaking. But then the weather is about to change once more. You notice an area of cloud and rain pushing into the far southwest. So whilst many stay dry during daylight hours, see some rain approaching Cornwall and Devon. And this next weather system, and this is the busier part of the weather week, starts to take its wet weather northwards across parts of England and Wales and into Northern Ireland on through Tuesday night and into Wednesday morning. Hasn't finished there either. There's still some uncertainty about the northern extent, but it could also push into parts of Scotland. If it does so, we know there's some cold air in place here. We could see some snow, particularly on the hills out of that. And still a big range of temperatures from north to south across the UK. It's northern Scotland most likely to stay dry and avoid this weather system. But there will be another one coming in from the Atlantic as we go through Thursday, although the rain doesn't look particularly heavy. And then by the end of the week, a deepening area of low pressure promises more wet weather, but also stronger winds. It could be gales or severe gales in places as we go into Friday. So yes, looking pretty busy from Wednesday onwards, but it's particularly on Friday there is a risk of seeing some disruptive winds. Still chilly in the north, mild to the south. Bye-bye.
Follow the story, whatever you're doing, wherever you are. You can follow every moment in depth with BBC News. Get the full story at bbc.co.uk/news. Get the headlines as they happen with the breaking news alert. And keep up with events by watching the BBC News channel in the app. Follow the story wherever you are with BBC News.
This is weird, isn't it?
No, still weird. But if there's a report about where I live or what I do...
It usually sounds like this.
Or it might be this.
Or maybe even this.
Or sometimes this.
The BBC Young Reporter competition wants to change that.
If you're aged between 11 and 18 and have a story you think needs telling, the BBC can help you tell it. Find your voice and enter now at bbc.co.uk/Young Reporter competition.
I'm Kasia Madeira with BBC News. Our top story. Global warming is posing a greater threat to humanity than ever before. That's according to the UN. Their climate chief said that mankind was in danger of disappearing if temperatures continued to rise. Patricia Espinosa was speaking at the start of a climate conference in Katowice in Poland. Delegates will try to agree rules for how countries will meet commitments on cutting emissions. Donald Trump and Xi Jinping have agreed to put their trade war on hold. At the G20 summit, the two leaders said they'll postpone new US tariffs for 90 days. And this story is trending on BBC.com. A British couple have come forward to claim an engagement ring they dropped down a grate in Times Square after a marriage proposal. The New York Police Department appealed for help to locate them and have reunited them. That's all from me. Bye-bye. At just after midnight, it is now time for Hard Talk.
Welcome to Hard Talk. I'm Stephen Sacker. What each of us, our sense of who we are. At the most personal level, we all have our own family background. In the most general sense, we are, all of us, part of the human species. But it's the stuff in between that puts us in groups or tribes and often motivates our behavior. Gender, religion, ethnicity, nationality, these are the persistent fault lines that seem to separate us from them. Well, my guest today is Kwame Anthony Appiah, an academic and public intellectual who says we need to rethink identity to escape the myths of the past. But how? Kwame Anthony Appiah, welcome to Hard Talk.
Good to be here.
You have spent a great deal of your recent professional life thinking about identity and how each and every one of us labels ourselves. So let's start with a simple question. How do you label yourself?
It depends a little bit on who I'm talking to. Taxi drivers, usually I explain that I'm half Ghanaian and half British by origin and that I live in the United States. That gives me 3 countries to talk about in terms of sort of national origin.
And to you, when you describe where you're from and the sort of mixedness of your identity, are those signifiers? Are you thinking that you're sending signals to your interlocutor about who you are?
Yes, I think I'm sending signals. I think they're sort of, as it were, weak signals from a faraway planet or something, because they don't tell you as much as I think many people assume they will. So I grew up in Ghana. My father was Ghanaian. But that doesn't tell you very much about how interested I am in Ghana. It doesn't tell you how much I know about Ghana, since I haven't lived there for 30 years, and so on. So I think, many people it would be more informative to know what their nationality is, you know, and pretty quickly in a conversation, I think you move beyond the stereotypes into more detail, and then it doesn't matter so much that it's not all that helpful.
Would it be too simplistic to say that in all of your work on race, religion, or creed, as you put it, on gender, and all of the different ways that we can identify ourselves, and do identify ourselves and others, your conclusion is that, frankly, we're all so complex and so unique that almost any label we apply is in some way or other misleading?
I think that's right, because if you take all the big labels, you know, the race, religion, nationality, even class, in all of those, there's so much diversity within them. You know, men are not all the same. Men are very different from one another. Women are very different from one another. People in Britain are different from one another. People in London are different from one another in a million ways. So that being told that somebody's a Londoner doesn't actually give you a huge grip on anything very important about them, which doesn't mean that there aren't moments when being a Londoner isn't hugely important to people. There are mayoral elections. It's important to be, if you're a Londoner, when the mayor is being elected. If there were a big, as there have been in the past, big terrorist attack in London, that would bring Londoners together. They would have a sense that, okay, we're all facing this together. But it wouldn't tell you very much about food, language, politics. It wouldn't tell you about lots of things.
Let's unpick it, in a sense, sort of strand by strand, and let's start, if I may, with race, because as you've already made clear, you're the product of a mixed marriage.
Yeah.
Ghanaian dad, English, rather aristocratic mother.
Yes.
I've chosen race first because in a way your writings on race have been some of your most controversial, because going quite a long way back, pretty much 30 years, you did write this. You said, the truth is that there are no races, and you sort of indicated that the whole idea we have of race and racial distinction is a sort of false construct that is more than anything else a product of men in power in the 19th century sort of trying to divide up the world and its races in a way that suited them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's right.
So you don't believe in race?
I think one should distinguish between whether what people believe about the species and its subdivisions And I think most of that's false. I think most of what people believe about how you can divide people up in terms of the bodies they have and the colours and the hair and so on and the skulls and the genetics, I think most of that is sort of wildly off.
So no useful racial distinctions and differentiations can be made?
No, I don't think so. Not for biological purposes.
You mean because genetically we're all such a mishmash?
We're a mishmash, and we've human beings. So let's do it this way. I think many people think this. They think that, as it were, in 1492, when Columbus set off, there were these 4 or 5 major populations. There was the East Asian, South Asian, European, African, and Amerindian populations, and that they had been there for a very long time, not mixing with anybody.
And sort of quote-unquote pure.
And they were sort of pure and separated, and they were bounded off from one another. And then, with the sort of age of exploration and so on, suddenly all these things were mixed up. That's just not what happened. There's always been, as a biologist might put it, gene flow. Genes and people and the genes have been traveling all the time. And we know this because we know that Alexander the Great took 30,000 people, across great swathes of Asia. We know that Genghis Khan took people across great swathes of the world, and so on. So I think, but that turns out to have happened many more times than we realise.
And I understand that, but I guess in that sense, here's where it's difficult for me to see how the well-researched public intellectual that is you connects with the ordinary, let's say, black person living in southern Mississippi whose life experience tells him there is such a thing as race, and he is a victim of racist attitudes and a systemically racist society.
Good.
What meaning does your message that race is a false construct have for him or her?
Well, I don't think I wouldn't start with that person in that situation. Though if they wanted to talk to me more, I would point out that the way they're treated there, because of the way they look, doesn't predict how they would be treated in large other parts of the world, so that where you are in a particular place, race can have a very specific meaning, which is why I would now say there aren't any races, but there are racial identities, and those racial identities are shaped by the way people think. Not everywhere, but in particular places. So in Mississippi right now, the distinction between black and white people is extremely clear, and it remains the case that there's significant differential treatment by the government, by other people, and so on in that place. Though there are going to be people, even in Mississippi, who are hard to place. There are going to be people who have, say, one African ancestor 4 generations ago, but the rest of them European, who might be thought by some people to belong on the black side in Mississippi and by others to be on the white side. So the boundaries aren't going to be clear even in a place like Mississippi. But the consequences of being on one side or another, those are as clear as anything. And that's why you can't draw from the fact that there aren't any races, you can't draw from that the conclusion that racial identities don't matter. They matter enormously. But in insisting that they aren't real, I'm pointing out that they're created by these forms of behavior, by these beliefs, many of which are false. That's why the book's called The Lies That Bind. Yeah. But what's created
and you would apply the same approach to religion or creed, as you call it, and presumably to sort of gender, patriarchal politics, and to class politics. So in essence, what you're saying, if I may say so, I don't mean this to sound rude, but it's fairly simple in a way. You're saying that, people in power, which particularly in the 19th century, which is a very important century for all of this, were white men, basically constructed a whole series of different frameworks in which they could explain and perpetuate their own power.
Yes. I mean, I don't think they were clear that that's what they were doing. If they'd been clear about what they were doing, it wouldn't have been so easy to do. It's much easier to do these things while not accepting that that's what you're doing. But I do think we're living with the legacy of these forms of classification, and I do think that all of them have serious mistakes built into them, which are worth disentangling. At the end of the disentangling, there will still be men and women and a few people in the world who are hard to classify as either. There will still be people who in Mississippi are black for all practical purposes. There will still be people who are Protestant and Catholic in Northern Ireland. But I think it's important in trying to respond to the problems associated with those identities and to the good things that are associated with those identities, it's better to be clearer about how they're actually made.
But do you find it disappointing that you know, a couple of years ago you delivered the rather influential Reith lectures here in the UK all about in a sense, the myths and the false constructs that underpin much of what we think about race and religion and what have you. You've since written this book, The Lies, and that's the key word, The Lies That Bind. So you're doing your best to explain to all of us, from your position as a public intellectual, that a lot of what we think about our identities is based upon false premises. And yet, here we sit today in the early 21st century with a world that seems more driven by group identity and tribalism and groupthink than ever before.
Yes. Well, at least if not, I mean, certainly the things I'm reporting in my book, it's not as if I discovered all these things all by myself. These are, much of what I say is pretty commonsensical in the world of the sociologists and the philosophers who think about these things.
But I suppose my point is that there, you know, it's a pejorative term, and again, I'm being a little disrespectful, but there you sit in your sort of academic ivory tower, unpicking a lot of this stuff, and it makes not a blind bit of difference to the way societies work, power is wielded, and the way people think.
So I'm going to say something that sounds like an American. I have gotten used to that. I've gotten used to that. I think, maybe it's worth saying what I think the job of someone like me is. My job is to provide tools for people to think about these things that are better than the tools they've currently got. My job is not to tell people what to do. It's not even to tell them how to solve their problems. I don't think of that as what I'm doing. I'm just trying to do the thing that I'm best at, which is thinking these things through carefully and giving people, in what I hope is a manageable form, I hope I tell stories as well as make arguments, the tools for thinking about it better. But I don't expect it to have a huge impact. And if you really, by itself, on the other hand, I think these ideas are useful tools for the people who are trying to make the world better, the activists, the social movement people, those people. I think it's helpful for them to be clearer about their situation and about what the possibilities are. I'll give you just a simple example. If races were really real, and if there were really important objective differences between them, then some of the inequalities in the world might persist to the end of time because of that. I'm pretty confident that that won't happen once we recognize that the way we treat people is generating a lot of the racial inequality in the world.
Important caveat, isn't it? Once we recognize, because one might hope that the trajectory of human sort of cognition would be forever upward. But frankly, right in the era of Donald Trump, I mean, I'm not editorializing about the Trump administration, but the fact is that a lot of the messages that come from the President of the United States are clearly appealing to tribe, appealing to group, are divisive and polarizing rather than seeking out a universality.
Yes.
How do you interpret what is happening in America today?
Well, I think that the important thing to see is that the temptation to use simplified pictures of the way the world is divided up to generate support for political campaigns and for political agendas, that's just a feature of the world. And one of the things one tries to do as a political person, I mean, in one's life as a citizen trying to think about politics, is to try and undermine and reduce the support for the people who take advantage of this easy mechanism, this mechanism of dividing us into us and them, and to create a kind of solidarity based on false beliefs about what we are like and false beliefs about what they are like. I think those people are dangerous. The world is full of them.
So I mean, this isn't just about Donald Trump. One could also look at the populism and nativism in Europe, with people like Matteo Salvini, whom I interviewed on Hard Talk recently, in Italy, and you could look at Viktor Orban in Hungary. You could look at a whole host of, and frankly, you could look beyond the shores of Europe too, to India, where the current government uses nationalist and polarizing cultural messages. Yes. But the point you alluded to earlier is that you ultimately are an optimist, and you believe that the trajectory of the human condition is in that positive sense toward a more universalist, a more humane, understanding, compassionate humanity.
Yes.
How can you square that with what you see?
Well, I guess because I'm looking at it over a longer horizon than just 5 or 10 years or 10 or 20 years. I'm thinking about how much things have improved in these respects in many ways over the last century or so, for example. Think about the massive improvement in the condition of working class people in many, many countries over the last century. Look at the massive reduction in racial discrimination in the law in the United States over the last 100 years. Look at the increasing coming together of Europe at the moment of these moments of nationalism, and putting Brexit to one side, which one has to do. Europe is way more unified and united than it was in the 19th century. So, or even in the mid-20th century. So I think all of these things, if you look over a long enough horizon, you can see that the general tendency is in the direction that I would regard as up.
One area where I can see that you would find solace would be in the way in which, certainly in the Western world, societies and cultures view gender issues, and in particular sexuality. I mean, you're for a very long time an out gay man. Yes. You took advantage of America's change of the law so that you could marry your long-term partner. Yes. How far can we go with the notion that human beings are now free to choose their identities in ways we never even thought of before, not just in terms of sexuality, but even in terms of basic gender, where now there is a very powerful movement to change the way, the binary way we see men and women. There are a lot of people who define themselves as non-binary. Mm-hmm. There are others who are transgendering, and society slowly appears to be moving to accept them in new ways. Where does this end?
Well, I don't think it ends. There are two things that are important about where it doesn't end. It doesn't end with the disappearance of identity. It doesn't. So we are reforming our gender system, but we're not getting rid of gender altogether. I believe that over the long haul into the remote future, we'll still have gender. It'll be more complicated than the old simple binary system, but there will be men and women and some people in between.
But I suppose the question is, where does self-identity end? Because interestingly, I'm lurching between different spheres, but I'm mindful that on Hard Talk not so long ago, we spoke to a woman called Rachel Dolezal, yes, who is of white parentage, but identified and indeed became an activist on behalf of the black community, yes, and lived her life as a black woman. Mm-hmm. Though when she was challenged about this, because people realized eventually that she had two white parents, it became a fascinating and difficult debate about who is to say what being black is. And she said, look, I've never identified as white. I feel myself to be black, so therefore, to that extent, I'm black.
Well, I think she's a very to think about, because you ask what's the relationship between self and others. I think you have to think of these things as a matter of a negotiation. You can't simply declare the meaning of your own race all on your own. Race is a social category. You need to, if you don't like where it's put you, you need to persuade the world to change. That's what trans people have done. Trans people have done what Rachel Dolezal didn't do, which is they've created a movement to allow them to be what they want to be in our system. They've asked us to change the system. I'm happy to respond affirmatively to that request to change the system. I don't think it does any harm to me, to my masculinity, to adapt the system in that way. And even if it did a little bit of harm to my masculinity, I'd be happy, because it's obviously very important to them. If Rachel Dolezal could have persuaded, could have made these arguments and persuaded people and begun the thing, and if she could have done it in a way that was a little bit more straightforward, because what she was actually doing, she knew, involved concealing something that other people thought was important. Now, she didn't think it was important, and that's an interesting fact about her. But unfortunately, black in America doesn't belong to her, and so the only way it can be changed in the direction that she wants, and I'm willing to listen to her arguments for doing it that way, is if she makes the arguments, creates the movement, and she can't do that on her own. She has to do it with other people. She has to persuade other people.
In this interview, and indeed in some of your writings, you have been very consistent, saying it's not my job to fix the society, it's simply to understand and explain how societies work to my fellow citizens. Now, I get that, but do you have ideas which you can share with me as to how to overcome the lies that currently underpin our identity?
Well, I think the most important thing for us to overcome, and to the extent that getting rid of the lies helps, I'm in favour of that, is the moments when identities lead to hostility and hatred and division. That's the thing that one's looking for. For that, I think some things can be said, but these are just things that are known to social psychologists. One is, don't close yourself off. People who live with people of diverse identities tend to be less bigoted than people who don't. So don't allow yourself to be channeled off into a world in which you only are among white people, only among Catholics, only among straight people and so on. Open your social experience to people of all the major kinds and do things with them that are not about race or religion or sexuality, but are about soccer or about going to the movies or about building something in your community together. Work together with people, because I think working together with people of diverse identities makes the identities less dangerous. And then, frankly, if you have false ideas about them, as long as the false ideas aren't leading you to behave badly, I'm not so worried about them. People have false ideas about absolutely everything, not just identity. People have false ideas about cooking. And if it doesn't do too much harm, I'm not too worried about it.
A final thought. We have a thinker and writer in the United Kingdom called David Goodhart, who said that these days the most important distinction and identity that one can use when looking at people in Western societies is between those he calls anywheres and those he calls somewheres. Now, the anywheres are the highly educated, usually metropolitan, highly mobile people who are comfortable in an open intellectual environment, living pretty much anywhere in their own country or indeed in the world. That would be you. And then the somewheres are deeply rooted people who are not so mobile, whose thought processes are perhaps more localized, not so open, and then they, according to David Goodhart, are much less interested in the kind of ideals that you've just been painting with me.
I am happy to live in a world with the somewheres. I just don't want them shaping the world for the rest of us in a way that makes it very difficult for us to do what we want to do. So if, my favourite example of this is the American example of the Amish in Pennsylvania. They close themselves off, they don't like talking to strangers, they don't like money, they don't like motor cars, they don't like lots of things that I think of as sort of inevitable parts of the modern world, and they've made a world for themselves. I think they're entitled to that. I believe that their freedom is as important as anybody else's freedom. And they don't do any harm to the rest of us. They don't go out into the world campaigning against the others. They just live separately. I don't mind that. I think if you want to be a somewhere like that, that's fine. But if you want to be the kind of somewhere who wants to take over the United States or Britain and turn it into a country of somewheres, then I am on the other side from you. I'm a live and let live kind of person. I understand the attractions of locality. I remember the pleasures of my grandmother's English village, Midgenhampton in Gloucestershire. So it's a lovely place. And I could imagine a perfectly decent life living there all the time, mostly hanging out with people from Midgenhampton. It's not the life that I've chosen, and if there are people who want to live that life, I think that's fine. But I don't think they should shape a world in which what I want to do is impossible.
And we have to end there. But Anthony Appiah, it's been a pleasure having you on Hard Talk.
Good. Very nice to talk to you.
Thank you very much indeed.
Hello, more rain for parts of England and Wales in the day ahead. Tuesday quieter for all, but then the weather gets pretty busy again from Wednesday, as we will see. A chilly start the further north you are as Monday begins, and in Scotland a risk of ice on untreated surfaces because we had some wet weather overnight. It's cleared away, allowing temperatures to dip away. As we go on through the day, this is the area of clouds, some showers or outbreaks of rain moving through parts of England and Wales. It could produce some heavier bursts, squally winds, South Wales and southwest England too. Northernmost counties of northern England, Northern Ireland and much of Scotland will stay dry and sunny, though on the northerly breeze it's quite chilly here, and there are further showers running into northern Scotland. Wintry in nature to relatively low ground as we go into the late afternoon evening, but a big range of temperatures, very mild again across South Wales. with temperatures approaching the mid-teens. But on the northerly flow here, that colder air filters southwards across all parts through Monday night and into Tuesday morning. You'll notice still a few showers around in Scotland, wintry in nature, so dusting of snow possible here and there, and icy patches again as Tuesday begins. But it does look like a widespread frost is going to be the most noticeable part of Tuesday morning, and there could be a few fog patches around as well. So we know it's going to be cold as Tuesday begins, but there will be plenty of sunshine around. Now, temperatures will be held down into single figures despite the sunshine after that cold, frosty start, and this looks to be the coldest day of the week, more widely speaking. But then the weather is about to change once more. You notice an area of cloud and rain pushing into the far southwest. So whilst many stay dry during daylight hours, see some rain approaching Cornwall and Devon. And this next weather system, and this is the busier part of the weather week, starts to take its wet weather northwards across parts of England and Wales and into Northern Ireland on through Tuesday night and into Wednesday morning. Hasn't finished there either. There's still some uncertainty about the northern extent, but it could also push into parts of Scotland. If it does so, we know there's some cold air in place here. We could see some snow, particularly on the hills out of that. And still a big range of temperatures from north to south across the UK. It's northern Scotland most likely to stay dry and avoid this weather system. But there will be another one coming in from the Atlantic as we go through Thursday, although the rain doesn't look particularly heavy. And then by the end of the week, a deepening area of low pressure promises more wet weather, but also stronger winds. It could be gales or severe gales in places as we go into Friday. So yes, looking pretty busy from Wednesday onwards, but it's particularly on Friday there is a risk of seeing some disruptive winds. Still chilly in the north, mild to the south. Bye-bye.
Sometimes being in the driving seat is... She stayed in school. She's a... This isn't just playing sports. This is... The simple act of standing, and you're a... You don't need superpowers to change the world. 100 Women. A season of inspiring and challenging stories across the BBC.
This is weird, isn't it?
No, still weird. But if there's a report about where I live or what I do...
It usually sounds like this.
Or it might be this.
Or maybe even this.
Or sometimes this.
The BBC Young Reporter competition wants to change that.
If you're aged between 11 and 18 and have a story you think needs telling, the BBC can help you tell it. Find your voice and enter now at bbc.co.uk/Young Reporter competition.
There are many movies out at the moment that are claiming to be comedies. This beats all of them. And on the one hand, it's a political tale. On the other hand, it is a magic, realist fable. It is baggy and overlong. You can either just see it as a really good popcorn adventure or as something much deeper. That's what a proper cult movie looks like. My problem with it is I wanted it to be darker. The script is laughable, but not in a good way. It's just proved so divisive. I was reminded of the friendship between Elliot and E.T. Every time anyone says mockumentary, immediately think, is it as good as Spinal Tap? The answer is no. Very smartly reinvented a franchise, and who thought that was possible? It does the thing that cinema is meant to do at its very best, to completely immerse you, to transport you, to take you to another world.
Words of Wisdom, the film review, Friday at 5:45 on the BBC News Channel.
Join Simon McCoy as he brings you the top stories live.
The ball is entirely in the UK's court. We could have got our tennis correspondent to report on this.
The latest in sport.
Heaven knows how they're dealing with this on the court.
The heat or the wind? I'm not quite sure.
Well, both.
The day's weather.
It's getting colder.
And undeniable chemistry.
He's still laughing. We have to talk to each other.
There's only one Simon.
So you're the real.
Afternoon Live with Simon McCoy, weekdays at 2 p.m. on the BBC News Channel.